Good evening. Elvis Presley died today. He was 42. Apparently it was a heart attack. He was found at his home in Memphis, not breathing. His road manager tried to revive him. He failed. A hospital tried to revive him. It failed.
It began quietly. Before sunrise at Graceland, the air was still, and the few men standing near the marble headstone could feel it. For decades, it had been untouchable, a sacred piece of American history. But that morning, the order was real. Elvis Presley's grave was to be opened. They said it was for preservation, routine inspection, nothing to worry about. But if you've lived long enough to know the way this world hides its truth, you understand nobody opens the king's grave without a reason. And deep down, even the men holding the papers knew this wasn't about maintenance. It was about mystery. Whispers spread before the sun even broke the horizon, that there were sealed documents hidden in his coffin, that the Presley estate had received a private tip, that something inside that vault could change how we remember Elvis's final years. The press wasn't allowed within miles, but the story leaked anyway. Elvis's grave has been opened. 3 minutes later, word reached Memphis, and the world erupted. What they found inside wasn't bones, or money, or jewels. It was something else, something that would force even his closest friends to ask, had Elvis ever truly left us? And before we get there, before that discovery is revealed, we have to go back. Because what they uncovered in that grave began not in the ground, but in the days leading to August 16th, 1977. The days when the king himself started digging his own emotional grave, long before his body followed. He was alone. Even when Graceland was full of people, it felt empty. The laughter that once poured out of those white-columned walls had faded into echoes of footsteps and locked doors. It wasn't the drugs or the fame or the tours that broke him. It was the silence. That kind of silence that follows you from room to room, until even your reflection won't look you in the eye. Elvis was 42, but his soul carried a lifetime of noise. He would pace the hallways after midnight, clutching a book in one hand, mumbling verses from the Bible he kept by his bed. Some nights, he'd call old friends just to hear a familiar voice. Jerry Schilling, Red West, Charlie Hodge, anyone who'd still pick up. But even they could tell he wasn't really there anymore. His body was swelling. His shows were slipping. But when he walked on stage, fans still screamed like it was 1956. The difference was, Elvis wasn't screaming back. Behind the jumpsuit and rhinestones, his heart was tired. He had built a world so bright, it burned him alive inside it. The people around him, the colonel, the doctors, the so-called friends, all wanted a piece of what was left. And every time they took a little, Elvis smiled and said he was fine. He wasn't. He'd sit at his piano at 3 a.m. playing Unchained Melody until his fingers trembled. Sometimes he'd stop mid-song and whisper, "Lord, I'm so tired." It wasn't exhaustion, it was surrender. He knew something was ending, and it wasn't just a tour. Lisa Marie's photos were spread across his desk next to unopened letters from Priscilla. He read her name on the envelopes, but couldn't bring himself to open them. Too much had already been said. Too many words had been thrown like knives between love and guilt. There's a story one of his aides once told, that the night before he died, Elvis wrote a note to himself on hotel stationery. It said, "I'm sick of being Elvis Presley." Whether that note was ever found again, no one knows. But the truth behind those words? Everyone felt it. Fame had given him everything except peace. He couldn't step outside without cameras, couldn't drive to church without bodyguards, couldn't say no to the colonel without a fight. Every choice was controlled, every breath scheduled. But even in that storm, he dreamed of freedom. He talked about it more often near the end, moving to a small town, growing a beard, living like a normal man again. His close friend Charlie once said, "He didn't want to die, he just wanted to disappear." And maybe that's what makes what happened next so haunting. Because Elvis didn't go quietly. The days leading up to his death were filled with restless energy, sudden bursts of faith, and late-night confessions that nobody quite understood. He'd quote scripture to the Memphis Mafia about redemption, about judgment, about rebirth. And then he'd laugh it off, say, "I'm just preaching, boys," before swallowing another handful of pills. One evening, he asked his cousin Billy Smith a strange question. "If I left everything behind, the house, the fans, the money, you think they'd still talk about me?" Billy said, "Elvis, they'd never stop." Elvis smiled and said quietly, "Then maybe that's enough." That line, caught between despair and peace, would echo through the family for years, because the morning after he died, something was found inside his bedside drawer, an envelope sealed and labeled in his handwriting, "To be opened only by family after I'm gone." No one ever confirmed what was inside. Vernon Presley took it that night and never spoke of it again. But some say that envelope contained the reason Graceland's gates would one day open again. Not for tourists, but for truth. And when workers broke the seal on that grave nearly half a century later, it wasn't curiosity that brought them there. It was a promise, a family promise tied to that final note, written by a man who knew his legend would outlive his life. He once told a friend, "They can bury my body, but they'll never bury my truth." And now, all these years later, the ground beneath Graceland was about to prove him right. The news of his death should have ended everything, but it didn't. It started something else, something darker. The morning of August 16th, 1977, should have been the day the world mourned the man who changed music. Instead, it became the day his story split in two, the legend they buried, and the truth they tried to hide. In the hours after Elvis was pronounced dead, chaos ruled Graceland. Phones rang off the hook. Strangers claiming to be friends pushed past the gates. Inside, the family was silent, confused. Hollowed out Vernon Presley, already frail, stumbled through the halls clutching paperwork and weeping. He kept saying, "Don't let them take him." But by the time the coroner arrived, it was already too late. The story had slipped into other hands. Hands that didn't care about the man, only the money. The official autopsy report was written in record time, too fast. Toxicology findings were sealed. Pages vanished. The cause of death kept changing, from heart failure to cardiac arrhythmia to undetermined. But those who were there that night knew it wasn't confusion, it was control. Colonel Tom Parker was already in motion. While the family sat in shock, Parker was on the phone with RCA executives, not about condolences, but about contracts. He ordered new merchandise, planned a memorial TV broadcast, and called for immediate album reissues to him. Elvis wasn't gone. He was now more profitable than ever. That was the Colonel's genius and his curse. He turned tragedy into business. And while he negotiated, Vernon quietly signed every document pushed in front of him. Among them, one transfer stood out: ownership rights for posthumous releases. But there was something else buried in those papers, something Elvis had fought against for years. A clause giving the Colonel near total control over what the public was allowed to know about Elvis's death. It was the same tactic Parker had used during Elvis's life: silence through paperwork. Days later, the body was laid to rest at Forest Hill Cemetery. The world saw the funeral procession. White hearse, tears, thousands of fans singing hymns. What they didn't see was the quiet argument happening behind the mausoleum doors. Priscilla wanted privacy. Vernon wanted peace. The colonel wanted control. He told the press the coffin was sealed for preservation. But inside the family, the rumor spread something wasn't right. One of the guards swore the coffin felt too light when it was moved. Another claimed the nameplate had been switched the night before. It should have ended there. But 2 weeks after the burial, someone broke into the cemetery. They said it was obsessed fans trying to steal the body. But local police never released the security tapes, and no arrests were ever confirmed. Instead, the Presley family made a sudden, unexplainable decision to exhume the body and move it permanently to Graceland. The official reason? To prevent further vandalism. The truth? No one outside that circle ever knew. But workers who helped with the transfer whispered that the inner casket was opened briefly before reburial, and what they saw didn't sit right. They said the face looked different. Some described it as wax-like, smooth, untouched by decay. Others said there were details missing, like scars they remembered from the real Elvis's hands. It became one of the earliest sparks of the Elvis is alive theory. But within the Presley estate, it created something even heavier: fear. Fear that the truth of what really happened that August morning might one day surface. Fear that the man they buried wasn't the same man who left the bathroom floor. Still, the world moved on. Graceland became a tourist site. Fans lined up for hours to touch the gates, take pictures, feel close to him. But the family silence only grew louder. In interviews, Priscilla would smile and say, "Elvis is at peace." Yet behind that practiced calm was a question she never answered. What did they really move to Graceland? Over time, even Lisa Marie asked. When she became old enough to read the old reports, she noticed how many signatures didn't match, how dates overlapped, how medical examiners disagreed on the simplest facts. She once told a friend that there were two LV, the man the world buried, and the one her father told her about in those final letters. Decades passed, and the questions only deepened. Why were parts of the autopsy sealed for 50 years? Why did Vernon burn dozens of his son's private journals the week before he died? And why did the family later request restricted access to the original burial vault? Those questions led to one inevitable moment: the reopening. The quiet, official-sounding reason made sense to no one who knew the Presley story. They said it was about preservation maintenance. But among those close to the estate, the whispers returned. A document had resurfaced, a letter, an envelope, something Elvis wrote that pointed not to his death, but to what came after. And when those rumors reached the family, there was only one way to know for sure. They had to open the ground beneath Graceland and face what had been buried there since 1977. It was early morning when they began. Quietly, without media, without fanfare. Just a handful of workers, estate representatives, and 2 security officials, all bound by written secrecy agreements. The official documents called it a structural examination. But those who were there said the tension felt nothing like routine maintenance. Graceland's grounds were sealed off for hours. A pale fog hung over the marble, and even the air seemed to hold its breath. When the concrete lid was lifted, a rush of cool air escaped, followed by silence so deep that no one dared to speak. Every sound felt sacred, every second a trespass. For nearly half a century, Elvis Presley's name had rested there, carved into stone, surrounded by eternal devotion. But now, beneath that name, the vault opened like a wound in time. The inner casket was carefully revealed, still encased in protective glass. Everything seemed untouched. Yet something was wrong. According to one technician later interviewed under anonymity, there was an unexpected object resting near the lower section of the vault. Not biological, not ornamental, but something that didn't belong. It was wrapped in aged fabric, the texture of parchment, sealed with a dark ribbon hardened by decades. Fans didn't turn away. They leaned in. The same people who once worshipped the king now felt something they hadn't before. Empathy. He wasn't larger than life anymore. He was life-sized, fragile, human, and that made him eternal in a different way. Graceland became more than a museum. It became a mirror. Every visitor standing before his grave now wondered, what had fame cost him? What does it cost anyone who chases perfection until it swallows them whole? Even the estate, careful with its words, began shifting how it spoke of him. They started calling him the man who never stopped giving. But those letters showed he had given far more than anyone ever realized. Pieces of himself, traded for applause, until there was nothing left to give but truth. Pastor Bob Joyce once said, "If the world knew how deeply Elvis sought redemption, they'd see a different kind of miracle." And maybe that's what those pages represented. Not evidence of escape or scandal, but evidence of redemption, a confession that even the world's brightest light can burn out if it's never allowed to dim. After the letters surfaced, the Presley family quietly reinforced the vault. The grave was resealed with new stone, and the area was blessed by a local pastor at Lisa Marie's request. No cameras, no crowd, just family, prayer, and the faint echo of Peace in the Valley drifting from a portable speaker. And when they were done, someone placed a single note on the marble: "You were heard." Because in the end, that's all he'd ever wanted. To be heard not as a king, but as a man who once walked the same lonely roads we all do, looking for love, losing it, finding faith again, and trying to make sense of the noise in between. The grave didn't reveal a mystery. It revealed a message. That greatness doesn't protect you from pain. That fame doesn't free you from fear. And that sometimes the most shocking truth isn't what lies beneath the ground, but what was buried inside the heart. And maybe that's the real legacy of Elvis Presley. Not the records, not the jumpsuits, not the myth, but the reminder that even legends break quietly, praying someone will notice before it's too late. So when we hear his voice now, trembling, soulful, aching, maybe we're not listening to a man performing for the crowd. Maybe we're hearing the sound of someone finally setting himself free. Because if those letters taught us anything, it's that Elvis didn't die trying to escape his story. He died trying to reclaim it. And in that sense, he might have finally won. If this story made you see Elvis in a new light, share it. Because the truth about legends isn't found in tabloids or museums. It's found in the quiet corners of their hearts, where no camera ever reached. Do you believe Elvis truly found peace before he left this world? Or was he still searching, even in his final words? Tell us in the comments. Your thoughts might be the continuation of his story. And if you want more untold truths from the life, love, and legacy of Elvis Presley, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, we uncover the moments history forgot, the real emotions, the heartbreak, the hidden humanity behind the icon, because the more we listen, the closer we come to understanding the man who changed music forever, and whose truth still sings long after the stage went dark.